Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Javon Harrington, back to hit you with another video, and today we are going to be continuing What If Deku Was Iron Man? My Hero Academia Armored Adventures, Part 7. But first and foremost, as always, if you are a fan of the channel and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcasting that's to come out now and in the future. As we go into part 7, I do have one brief announcement for this series. That is going to be that next Monday we are going to be doing something special, similar to a few series now as we are wrapping them up as we get to the final 2 parts of various stories. We're going to be having special days where the final 2 parts of the story are going to be on the same day. You'll get one in the morning, and then you'll get one that comes out a little bit later in the afternoon, and that will wrap up a series as a whole. So going into next week, you will get part 8 in the morning, and you will get part 9 in the afternoon, and that will wrap up What If Deku Was Iron Man. Now, as far as with the Multiverse of Madness series that's going to be coming soon after with our various crossovers, whether or not the series continues after that, it's going to be up to you guys. There's still a lot more with My Hero Academia that I can do, but I think that stopping it after the certain parts I get to will work for the best. That way, after the multiversal crossover, if some stories want to continue on in the future, they can. Or if not, then they can end where they do. But that's just something that we'll have to address when we get there. So keep that in mind. Next week, next Monday, we will be doing the final 2 parts in this series, with parts 8 in the morning and part 9 will be in the afternoon. But anyway, without further ado, let's get into today's video. So as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Before long, Class 1A was back together again, as the summer training camp was soon to be underway. The students riding along in their bus along with Class 1B as they made their way to the campsite. For Izuku, to say that the class had grown would be an understatement. After his adventures on Island, the class now had another new student, her name being Melissa Shields. Similar to Izuku, she was also quirkless, and used her own technology to be a hero, giving her the abilities to shrink along with the power suit that she had created. She dubbed herself as the Wasp. Of course, she was looking into potentially using growing technology, but that hadn't been explored yet. Plus, she liked being the Wasp. It was something that worked for her. She had even been working on transfiguring her helmet to allow her to be able to talk to various wasps. If she could command a horde of them at will, then she could truly be a force to be reckoned with. The class was now up to 22 students in total. Pretty big for your average classroom, but for Mr. Aizawa it was nothing that he couldn't handle. Of course, for one group within the class in particular, they were standouts above the rest. This group not only knew the secret about One for All and All Might, but they also carried another responsibility, that being the guardians of the Makuan rings. 10 power rings that came from outer space long ago, that fell into the hands of the first dictator known as the Mandarin. Since then, the title had been passed down over and over, until now the Mandarin the Ninth now reigned. However, in a world filled with quirks, trying to be the most superpowered of them all was easier said than done. However, the current Mandarin had set his sights on obtaining all 10 rings, and finishing what his ancestors started. However, he had some issues. First, his rebellious son, Shang-Chi, had disappeared along with the boy's mother, and with them one of the Makuan rings, the Ring of Fire. Worse than that though, Shang-Chi had gone on to make friends at UA. Among them, Izuku Midoriya, a boy whose father had been killed mysteriously, but was also a guardian of one of the 10 rings. Izuku's father was the guardian of the Power Ring, which gave the user the ability to amplify their physical power and strength. Of course, with the ring alone, Izuku could have become a great hero. But by that point in time, Izuku had already set himself to being the best that he could be using his own intelligence. But, as a testament to his father, he did use the ring's power to amplify his armored suits as a way to protect himself. Along the way, they fought many powerful villains, among them being the hero killer Stain, when they discovered that he had one of the Makuan rings also, the Ice Ring. They gave it to their fellow friend and confidant in Shoto Todoroki, allowing him the chance to master the ice ability. Another transfer would come to the school not too long after from the nation of Wakanda, his name being T'Challa, a young student who they learned was the hero Black Panther. Like Izuku and Shang-Chi, T'Challa was quirkless. However, he gained his power from another source, from eating the heart-shaped herb, passed down from generation to generation. He obtained the powers of the Black Panther, aided with his own suit and tech given from Wakanda, with help from his sister Shuri. He had his own suit made of the most powerful metal on Earth, that being the mysterious vibranium. The Black Panther, as the title was passed down, also served as the guardian for one of the 10 Makuan rings, the Ring of Lightning and Electricity. Finally, during their adventures on Eye Island, Melissa would learn that her father was also a guardian as well. He was the guardian of the Ring of Life, and as such, he had given it to his daughter, allowing her to become its guardian. Along the way, there were many new changes that occurred in this timeline. Momo Yaoyorozu, Izuku's new childhood friend, after he moved with his mother following the death of his father. She had become the inheritor of One for All, and was now the next wielder of the power. With that, this small group had now formed within Class 1A, along with Kirishima and Bakugo as well. This group knowing of many secrets, and yet still standing together, never knowing when evil would come on either side, as it was not only the Mandarin that they had to deal with, but there was also the League of Villains, and the potential greatest of them all, that being All for One. But nonetheless, they looked forward to the camping trip ahead of them, as they would arrive to the cliffside as they had once before. There they would meet the hero team known as the Wild Wild Pussycats, along with the young boy that was with them. They would learn of what they were going to be doing that summer, and even more so, were surprised to learn that their vacation, or rather, what could be known as hell, was starting a lot sooner than they thought, as the earth would begin to move instantly, and before they knew it, the classes both found themselves being thrown down the side of the cliff into the forested area, which was owned by the hero team. They would have to clear the forest to make their way to the campsite. Thankfully, for both Izuku and Melissa, they kept their hero costumes on them at all times. Izuku with his black and gold armored backpack, that could transform into the Armor Black and Gold series, as well as Melissa being able to carry her Wasp uniform on her as well, along with her tool belt that allowed her to grow and shrink. Once all of them fell down below, they would look to see Earth Golem monsters being created by one of the members of the Wild Wild Pussycats, coming after them from every direction. They had no choice but to fight and make their way through. With Izuku leading the charge and the others backing him up, they were able to clear a path and make their way to the campsite within decent time. Of course, this meant that the students all had great potential. Among them, especially being Izuku, the boy who was quirkless, and yet was still able to hang with some of the best. To see how versatile he had made his armors was an understatement, and it was no wonder why the world was starting to pay more and more attention to him. Though still, they were given some chance to clean themselves up and eat properly, as they had a long day of training ahead of them soon after. Izuku would see the boy once again, and he tried to speak to him, only to be met with rebuke as the boy attempted to punch him below the belt. Although thankfully, Izuku had been a bit more perceptive and was able to move out of the way. He chastised him for trying to do something like that, but the boy paid him no mind. All the same, the students would eat and rest, as the next day, early in the morning, they would have to begin their new level of training. As they awoken bright and early, Mr. Aizawa explained that they were going to be breaking themselves to build themselves back up once again. A quirk was like a muscle. It had to be trained properly, developed and cultivated. Only then would you be able to push yourselves beyond, to truly go plus ultra. Of course, there were many different ways for one to train and build up their quirk, and the students took to doing so in various ways. For Momo, being the user of One for All put her in a very unique state. Of course, she spent half of her training eating actually, getting herself a constant supply of food, as well as creating a small batch of Russian nesting dolls, something she liked to do on her spare time. The buildup of lipids in her body will allow her to create more powerful constructs in the future. For this version of the story, Momo Yaoyorozu's power with One for All creates a hybrid or a new power. For one, she gains the ability to do something quite similar to what Generator Rex can do, creating armored constructs around her, like the Smashing Hands or the Skull Stompers, or creating a jetpack that can protrude from different parts of her body. On top of her regular creation quirk, she also has her increased strength. However, instead of calling it full cowling, she calls it the overdrive, and she uses it to various forms and percentages. Currently, she would be up to 10% overdrive, which was pretty decent for her, but since she had already had training with such a versatile quirk at a young age, it gave her a leg up when it came to her training, plus the training that she had done with Gran Torino during the work studies. As for Shang-Chi, he did not have a quirk, but rather he used his chi, his spiritual and physical energies, manipulating them in order to make himself stronger at various points within himself. He simply continued on doing his chi training like he normally did, but whenever he wasn't doing that or other forms of martial arts, he improved using the fire ring that he had been given. For Todoroki, this was similar, although he would train using the ice ring as well. Bakugo would train using his explosion quirk, and the others would improve in various skills as well. For T'Challa, it was more so of keeping his senses sharp at all times, so he decided to go jogging around the forest area, using his panther-like speed in order to push himself to the absolute limit, including going on a few races with Ida to see who could truly go the fastest. And to an extent, he could actually keep up with Ida to a degree. This only pushed Ida to train harder and to improve his speed and his quirk. But what about Izuku and Melissa? What were they going to do? Well, naturally, they took doing physical training with everyone else. Granted, they were quirkless, so realistically, there was only so much that they could do. But Mr. Aizawa believed that they should be balanced. They couldn't always rely on their tech and gadgets to save them, so they had to be able to be sharp and on their feet at all times. That's why they would be trained by Mr. Aizawa personally during the mornings. He would oversee their hand-to-hand combat skills, making sure they improved greatly, and Izuku would take note of this. In the afternoon, with a little funding from Izuku's various ventures outside of school, he was able to have a workshop brought along with them. In this small little makeshift workshop, Izuku and Melissa would spend their afternoon time working and improving on their various gadgets and other gizmos. And then if they had free time, they would do some sparring or training with the others. For Melissa, not only did she use her PIM particles to work on her shrinking technology, but she also had help in another category as well. She worked with a fellow student in Koji Koda, as he had the quirk and a voice, allowing him to communicate with various animals through speech. She studied his quirk and was able to modify it for herself. Using her helmet that she wore when she shrunk, she was able to find a wavelength that would allow her to communicate with various insects, mostly ants, but she could also communicate with wasps as well. She found a wasp nest not too far away, and she tried it out. After a few moments of getting the frequency right, she was able to communicate with a colony of wasps and get them to listen to her and work with her. She was able to study these wasps and was soon able to develop proper and better flying technology for her wings whenever she grew or whenever she shrunk. She was even able to create wrist guards that could give out a stinging blast as well. Combined with her ever-growing martial arts, Melissa was improving in her skills more and more. But then there came Izuku. Izuku wasn't sure of what type of armor he wanted to make next. His black and gold armor had been serving him fairly well, so he wasn't entirely sure where he could take it next. Of course, there were various other types of defenses that he would have to work against. But then, he considered Momo and how she used her quirk, the way she was able to build constructs. He wondered if he could create a type of nanite armor. Izuku would get to work on this and develop metallical nanites that could join together to form armor and other forms in weaponry. The nanite armor would probably be the most efficient kind of armor that he could have at any point in time, and it would probably be the most advanced of all the armors he had created so far. Of course, there were other armor models that he had brought with him to work with. There was his aquatic armor, there was also his stealth armor, and finally, of his 3 projects, there was his juggernaut armor. It was a bulk type of suit, if you will. Of the 3 of them, they were built for special needs purposes. The aquatic armor, in case Izuku ever had to go underwater, the stealth armor for moving at night, and then finally, the juggernaut armor, for villains of a more bulky and cumbersome size. The students would continue to train and hone their skills. As they did so, Izuku would learn more about Kota from one of the members of the Wild Wild Pussycats, learning that he was actually her younger cousin. He would come to learn why Kota had a disdain against heroes. It actually came from an incident that happened with his parents, and how they were killed by a villain. As such, it left him with a sour outlook on life when it came to heroes, and he had come to despise them. Izuku understood why he felt the way that he did, feeling powerless and unable to do anything about it. Of course, Izuku wanted to speak to him, but he wasn't sure of what to say. What could he say for someone who had lost his parent in such an ugly fashion? There was really no words to justify anything. Still, he would try to visit him from time to time, trying to speak to him, trying to understand him. He would tell Momo about it, and Momo would offer Izuku words of encouragement. She knew that Izuku came from a good place, and she understood that he wanted to try to help Kota overcome his hatred, and to not let him be consumed by it. But still, she would encourage him to also think about it from Kota's point of view. The more Izuku did, the more it made him question his own sanity for wanting to be a hero. For everything that he had done, he had no reason to get involved, no reason to do any of the things that he did. Sure, he had won many fights, but he had lost them as well. And in the end, despite everything that he achieved, he was only human. He had no quirk of his own, no special power or ability. You strip away his armor and his ring, many would say that he didn't have anything at all. But Izuku knew he had his brain, he had his wits, he had family and friends that supported him. And it was because of that Izuku was able to persevere and carry on. Before long, there was a bit of enjoyment for the students at the camp, as they were going to be doing a special test of courage. It took place at night, and in the beginning of the festivities, everything seemed fine. Everything seemed to be going on normal as usual. A few students had to stay behind though with Mr. Aizawa, as they had to take remedial classes. As the test of courage began, there would suddenly be a poisonous gas, a smoke that would cover the entire forest area. The students wouldn't know what was going on, but suddenly, there would be a burst of blue flame, as the Vanguard Action Squad of the League of Villains would attack. They had come with a goal in mind. They had come to capture Katsuki Bakugo, Shoto Todoroki, and Tokoyami, believing that they were powerful assets that could be persuaded to their side. And if only to make matters worse, they were not the only group of villains that had arrived. Ghost had also come along as well. The young girl, born with a special quirk that allowed her to make herself intangible for various amounts of time, along with the villain Whirlwind, Death Dealer, and the Melter. They had come for their own reason, for the capture of Shoto Todoroki, Shang-Chi, as well as Melissa, for they were the bearers of the Makuan rings, the ones that were sought after by their master, the Mandarin. An all-out fight began in the forest area, the students trying to cover up from the poisonous gas, as they found themselves fighting a fight on two fronts. Momo would use her quirk going into overdrive. She would create a large fan-like machine with her arms, pushing out as much of the poisonous smoke as she could, while creating gas masks for the other students to protect themselves. In the meantime, while the League of Villains led their assault, the 10 Shadows would do the same, coming into conflict with one another, the two groups trying to figure out what the other was doing here and what they were after. Ghost and the 10 Shadows believed that the League of Villains were also after the Makuan rings, and warned them that they had come for them first. However, the League of Villains had no idea what the Makuan rings even were, but if they were something of that value, then they were worth looking into. Izuku had flown off to go and check after Kota, who he knew was all alone in his hiding place. But at the worst possible moment, he would come face to face with a powerful villain, that being none other than Muscular. And worse off, this was the villain that had killed Kota's parents. A wave of anger rushed over Izuku as he came face to face with Muscular. Muscular had remarked that he had seen that armor before, noting that he was the boy that their master had wanted to have killed also, Izuku Midoriya, the Iron Man. Izuku, in his black and gold armor, would fight against Muscular. However, even with his armor protecting him, Muscular took the advantage from the start of the fight. He overwhelmed him with strength that Izuku simply couldn't match the way he was now. All hope seemed lost. That was until Izuku called in for backup. A large metal pod would come flying to the forest top ahead, crashing into the side of the mountain and slamming into Muscular as it stopped in front of Izuku. The metallical pod would open and transform, turning itself into a suit of armor that was almost the size of Muscular. Izuku, already inside of his base armor, would jump into his Juggernaut armor form, or as he now dubbed, the Quirk Buster. The Quirk Buster came face to face with Muscular. Muscular was happy to see this new armor form. Izuku truly was a boy of many talents. Being capable of making armors for various forms of quirk and quirk combat, it truly piqued his interest, as more muscle fibers wrapped around him, making him even stronger than before. Izuku knew that this fight wasn't going to be easy. The suit was going to have to draw on a lot of the Power Ring's limitless strength if they were going to stand a chance at winning. Going to at least 50% power, the Quirk Buster and Muscular would engage one another in knockdown drag-out combat. In the beginning, Muscular had the advantage as he went hitting on and on, a never-ending barrage of fists. However, Izuku was not too overwhelmed, if only because of his training with Mr. Aizawa. He had learned and picked up a few good habits when it came to fighting. It was more than just overpowering your opponent, but it was about knowing when and where to strike. The suit would calculate the most vulnerable positions, and Izuku would strike them. Instead of going for the knockout headshot, he attacked him where it hurt. He hit him in the gut, the liver shots, the kidney shots. He poured more and more of his power into those hits, while Muscular continued to smash at the head of Izuku's armored body. But as the fight continued and dragged on, it seemed as though Muscular was starting to slow down, bit by bit. And the reason for this was simple enough. Muscular could make himself stronger on the outside, but he couldn't on the inside, and Izuku knew this. As the fight dragged on more and more, Muscular found himself coughing up blood continuously. However, despite Izuku's plan, the Quirk Buster armor could only hold up for so long. In fact, in a few of their exchanges, he had even lost one of his arms in the process. But of course though, he stayed the course of battle, until eventually it opened, as Muscular stacked on more power onto himself. He coughed up more blood from the internal damage that he was suffering, and that lapse in judgment gave Izuku enough time. As he exited out of the armor immediately, he charged it to 100% and gave him a right hook to the face, knocking him down into the ground and knocking him out cold. Izuku, now in his basic armor, would pick up Kota and take him to safety, as Mr. Aizawa and the Wild Wild Pussycats would go to the students, trying their best to get them to safety, as the 10 Shadows and the League of Villains both swarmed on their similar targets. T'Challa, Todoroki, Shang-Chi, and Bakugo found themselves standing, all four back to back, as they fought off against the villains that swarmed them. Tokoyami was also losing control over Dark Shadow, as at night, the force of his quirk proved to be a bit too strong for him to control. Once Izuku found him, he would hit him with a uni-beam, similar to how he had done in the sports festival, causing him to retract back into himself and gain control. They made their way through the forest, helping as many students as they could. Shang-Chi, knowing the deadliness of a few of these villains, would try to keep his friends from getting in harm's way, as he fought against both Ghost and Death Dealer at the same time, the two of them remarking that it had been a while since they had last seen Shang. And while Shang didn't like to admit it, he did enjoy seeing them again, even if they were on the wrong side. The villains and the heroes continued their three-way deadlock. The League of Villains wanted to know more about the Makuan rings as they were. What were they exactly? And just why were they so important? They had tried to search for Melissa, but thankfully she wasn't anywhere near the fighting. She had actually stayed back at the base, since she was helping Mr. Aizawa with the other students while they were doing remedial classes. She stayed back and on guard while Mr. Aizawa went out to help his students. Izuku joined the fight before him as they made their way, fire and destruction brewing all throughout the forest. It seemed as though hell had finally reached Earth. In the midst of combat, Mr. Compress got the upper hand on them. He had attacked at Shang-Chi and at Bakugo and Tokoyami, trapping the three of them inside of his compressed marbles as the League of Villains looked to make their escape. Izuku would chase after them at once, blasting away and attempting to catch them. Dabi would shoot out a large flame of blue fire. However, Izuku would respond with a uni-beam of his own. As he attempted to save them, he would break the three compressed marbles free. However, only Tokoyami would be saved, as both Shang-Chi as well as Bakugo would be pulled inside. However, before they could take him, Shang would slip his ring back to Izuku, telling him to keep it safe and that was the mission. Izuku would use the energy of his suit to race forward. However, he wasn't fast enough. The portal would close behind them, made by Kurogiri, and they would disappear into the night. The 10 Shadows realized they had failed, as they would disappear and call back to their master. The Mandarin was now made aware of what was happening. He already had 5 of the rings on his end. His armored suit was now complete. The only thing left to do was to fulfill his destiny of godhood. As he got the call from Ghost, he would be informed that the League of Villains had taken his son who had the Makuan ring. He knew now what he needed to do, as he made his way to his private jet. It was time to pay a visit to Japan, and to meet his troublesome son once again. As for Izuku, he landed back on the ground, ejecting himself from his suit of armor that had taken much damage from the battle of the night. As he held the fire ring in his power ring, other students would arrive asking what had happened. Uraraka looked for Shang, but she couldn't find him. Izuku didn't want to face her, for he knew that he would have to tell her what had happened. and Mr. Aizawa, as he arrived also, would learn of the fate of his students. The camp was closed down, and the police would arrive soon after. Many were taken to the hospital to recover. As Izuku sat there and waited, he would get a call from Jarvis. He would tell him everything that happened, and Jarvis would explain that everything was fine on their end, and that for now, he was just going to try to keep Izuku's mother safe. However, there would be a certain cry. Izuku wasn't sure what had happened, but the phone, it cut silent in an instant. Izuku wasn't sure what was going on. There was a loud crash, the sound of gunshots being fired, and he could hear the screaming of his mother. Izuku would leave out of the hospital immediately, as he raced and made his way back home. However, once he arrived, the only thing he would find on the ground was a dying Jarvis, and his mother was missing. Izuku ran to Jarvis' side, clutching on to the man that had been a father figure to him after his original father had passed away. As he held on to him, he asked him what was going on. He tried to stop the bleeding, and he called for emergency services to arrive as quickly as they could. But all the same, Jarvis pulled Izuku close and told him that it was the 10 Shadows. It seemed as though they had other targets as well. And now Izuku's mother, the person that he had tried to leave out of all of this, was now the one caught in the crossfires. We would find ourselves in 2 different locations. For one was the base of the League of Villains, and inside they had both Shang-Chi and Bakugo. And in another, Inko Midoriya was tied up. As she awoken, Ghost would walk forward in front of her. As she spoke, "Nice to meet your acquaintance, Miss Midoriya. Do tell me, do you know how your husband died?" This concludes What If Deku Was Iron Man? My Hero Academia Armin Adventures Part 7. As always, if you're a fan of today's video and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we continue What If Bel Crenel Was Thor? Don Machi, The Last King, Season 2, Part 2. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.